And welcome to Life Support Live, the weekly Star Trek show that helps you to boldly go in your own life and to better ourselves and the rest of humanity.
As a famous starship captain once said, to which another famous starship captain also said, wherever our mission takes us, though, we'll try to have a little fun along the way.
We always have a little fun as long as I am here with my friend Larry Dr. Nemechek, and I am Dr. Ali Matu. We're always going to have a little bit of fun here.
Yes, and you know what? We'll even let you decide who the real doctor is.
Today's episode, we are going to be talking about Klingon mental health. Klingon mental health from a Klingon perspective. This is an episode as suggested by you, all of you out there in the life support community.
Is it Klingon Mental Health Month again?
It just feels like we had that, Larry. Wasn't that just
it's COVID time. Everything is off.
So let's get started by, in the comments below, let us know what's your favorite Klingon episode and why. There's so many to pick from, so let us know in the comments what are some of your favorite ones. If this is your first time here at Life Support Live, Dr. Trek, what is this show? What are we doing here?
Well, if I have to sit here and tell you, Dr. Ali, then I'm out of here. But for everyone else who's paying attention, no, we are here to boldly go through uncertain times, COVID and otherwise, and we're geeking out on Star Trek as much as anybody, but doing it through a mental health lens. So somewhere between my briefing room and your counselor's log eventually, and then at the end of the show, your away mission tips for everybody. We'll have a good time today, and somewhere along the way, I'll throw in a K3 factor just to really deep dive Star Trek.
Yeah. And there's two ways to join us. You can always comment in the live feed. We're going live on Facebook and YouTube and Twitch. The main action of all the comments in the community is here on Facebook through Larry's Trekland page. But you can also join us through Skype, right there. So if you'd like to join the show, we open up the hailing frequencies at the end. So if you want to come on and have a conversation with us, we'd love to have you here. And yes, thank you, Dan. This was your suggestion. It came out of, I don't think it was last week. Was it last? It might have been 2 weeks ago. The recommendation.
It's been 2 or 3 weeks. There's been a lag, but that's what happens. Things percolate to the top.
Yeah. So Libby says, I can hear Worf saying Klingons do not have mental health. There's a lot of fun to explore here. So yeah, we're going to be talking about Klingon mental health. And so, Larry, when you think Klingons, when you think mental health, what stories leap out to you?
We were laughing about it, but like Libby said, I can hear Worf saying, Klingons do not have mental health. Because aside from anything that's not about warriors and honor, whether it's medicine at all, really, because the wounded aren't... Their society values people who are able to fight. So that's also, that's their training and ability, but their ability also translates into what their status is. So are they sick? Are they injured? Are they... not of the fighting persuasion? Are they a doctor? Are they a lawyer? Are they are they a scientist?
Have you seen many Klingon doctors? I don't.
We've had some healers. I think we've seen a couple, but yeah. But my point is, all those sidelong professions, they have them. They have to have a society function, but they're on the outs. But and then you wrap all that up with the whole Kahless honor thing. And yeah, you get off in some weird, as we have seen through the Worf saga, you get off in some weird. Worf and B'Elanna too as well. Yeah.
The Worf saga, I haven't heard it phrased that way, but I like that because he really does. Michael Dorn, the actor, and then Worf, the character, span pretty much all of Star Trek. He has interacted with almost every era, with the exception of the Kelvin timeline and the Star Trek Picard era. We have seen him. You see his great-grandfather or something in Star Trek VI as a...
Right,
as a lawyer,
Yeah.
and then Anyways, but that's going off track. This is not a Worf episode. I mean, I think you set us up really nicely, Larry. The Klingon culture is one that is very much focused on, at least the way we see it, it's very much focused on being a warrior and bringing honor and family and tradition. The Klingon culture is very focused around tribes. They call them houses, but in human culture we might call them these different tribes. These communities of people, and bloodlines are important. However, you can also be brought into a house. You can be adopted into a family. So those things are highly important. And Klingon biology, I think, plays a very big role here as well. We learn that the Klingons have a lot of redundant organs, and they have a lot of backups, which allow them to heal pretty quickly. I think they have 3 lungs, 2 hearts. I don't know. They have a lot
Everything is pretty, yeah. In fact, all the important equipment appears to be redundant. Yeah. Well, I meant spines, but all the important reproductive equipment seems to be doubled up too. So
right, that is canon too, thanks to Star Trek Discovery.
Thanks to don't ever knock Discovery, because now we have 2 Klingon whatsits.
Klingon whatsits.
It's a family show, I feel like.
Yes, it is, and we do. But I think that really impacts. So their biology is also impacting their culture, because why would they need to really develop medicine when they have a really resilient physiology? They are far more resilient to injuries, to stressors than humans are.
Well, to me, it also shows how far back I mean, this was never really said, maybe once or twice early on in the original series and the movies, but Kronos was supposed to be a planet of few natural resources.
Right.
So the competition was fierce, and if that's where the whole Klingon, they fought each other. They fought, supposedly in their mythology, they killed their own gods. So
right, Kahless.
Yes. The point is, they have been fighting for so long, not just a couple of 100 years or 1,000 years, but if it's been long enough to affect their evolutionary history, if they were self-selecting by who was able to survive battle that long, it's like the Vulcans that never had Surak.
Vulcan. Yeah, that's a really great parallel. Libby says, wasn't there a Klingon doctor behind the change in foreheads? Well, we don't really talk about that with outsiders, so no. The Klingon. Did I just out myself as a Klingon, as an augmented Klingon? I guess I did. Jock the Bach, Mage.
I'm impressed. I can do Kapla and the Kapla, and that's about it. But anyway.
Well, Larry, you know why. You got to start the day with a good gach. Once you do that, you can say anything in Klingon.
Don't ever start the day with a bad gach.
No. It needs to be alive. It needs to be wiggling around. You need fresh gawk. Otherwise, no bueno. No bueno. Ancient Klingon saying, no bueno.
That was a crossing of streams. Okay. No, but I mean, it's a point here that they have been fighting since it's like they've been fighting since primordial ooze day on on Kronos, and if it's affected the evolutionary biology that much to where the redundantly endowed folks with more than one heart, more than one lung, I mean, more than our share. And if that's who's self-selected for survival and that's what they bred to over the millennia, then that explains a lot and explains why things are so... I mean, there's points about how, like, even, it's kind of trite phrases now, we're so PC, but it's, when we talk about half Klingons, like B'Elanna, she had a hard time overcoming her Klingonness, even when she intellectually wanted to, and had a whole life where she was running away from her Klingons.
And I want to talk about that, and I want to talk about that as it relates to Worf in a moment. I want to get back to Libby's comment, because it does tie into the doctor medicine and how the culture is set up. So just to remind folks, those of you who might not have seen Star Trek Enterprise, they have a brilliant explanation for the change in makeup. I think it's
28 years in the making. Yeah.
It's a phenomenal explanation. Klingons got a hold of human genetically engineered DNA, which was called augment DNA. That was the same stuff that made Khan. They tried to use it to give themselves an advantage. That mutated with like a flu or something, Larry, something like that, and that caused this really detrimental disease that not only wiped away their cranial ridge, but then they died as a result of it. Phlox, with a Klingon doctor who did not have the research he needed because their medicine wasn't developed, they were able to stop the disease at just at the point where it destroys your cranial ridges. But you could still live. But they said it was going to be generations until they were able to wipe this out. And it was an airborne thing, and it spread out throughout the whole empire. So that explains your cranial ridges and why they eventually come back.
I understand they refused to lock down all the planets, so...
They also refused to wear face masks. Oh my gosh, Larry, it all comes around, doesn't it?
No true warrior would ever wear a face mask. What a human thing to do, in some way.
And I wanted to talk about the warrior caste that we've seen, or class. There are hints throughout Star Trek that the warrior class was not the primary ruling class in the Klingon Empire. That there was a warrior class, but there were also, the leadership class. There were the scientists, engineers. There were all these different orders in the Klingon society. But at some point, the warriors do take over, and I think we often get a biased view of Klingons. We see a lot of their warriors. A lot of their culture, religion centers around honor and duty and protecting your house and your name and these kind of things. But there are these other elements throughout Klingon society. You see the Klingon cook at the restaurant on DS9.
and musician, he's playing a concertina. So
yes. Yeah. And look, Klingon opera. Like, Worf loves Klingon opera. That means there are all these like Klingon artists out there, and they're highly valued in society. All the Klingons working in their vineyards making blood wine. Like there's someone's gotta ferment all that.
No.
All that.
No Klingon mimes, though. They were all killed off millennia ago.
No, yeah, the Klingon, they don't make baguettes either. Larry, I want to ask you this. Do we have a canonical explanation for what exactly blood wine is?
It's wine of whatever blood you want to put in. I'm trying to remember if it's Targ or Kalus's blood or whatever.
Kalus's blood.
It's acidic. I mean, if Quark and Garak can sit there and wax on and on about root beer for the Federation, I'm sure at some point they've had a sarcastic comment about blood wine, as long as it keeps...
I don't know if it's the blood of Targs or if it's the blood of your enemies. I don't think it's the blood of your enemies, because number one, that's not hygienic. Number two, it's very hard to prepare that stuff in large enough quantities. I'm willing to bet it's a blood of Targs.
Are we turning into a craft how-to show here? Is that
No, this is not the Star Trek cookbook. That is already out and exists. But
3 or 4 times, yeah.
And something I'm trying to get across here is the Klingons are not just about war and violence and conquest. They're not. And something we see in Star Trek Discovery is there are many tribes of Klingons. There are many ways to be a Klingon. There are different visual looks to Klingons. We see that with this individual right over here. Someone who, let me see if I can put him right on my face. There we go. That's kind of like, gah, blah, blah, da.
It's weird to imagine that face on
Remain Klingon.
Sorry, I trounced on your word. No, and I pull Volk up because for all the angst that Discovery caused people, and me at times, but basically I had to stand back and go, diversity, while these producers figure out what franchise they're working in, how it works. But it did strike a blow for, we had, all the, because of makeup, and not just because of makeup and budgets, but also time, all the races, all the species, I should say, take a long time. But eventually, Vulcans, we had dark-skinned Vulcans. We had more, Asian-looking Vulcans than Caucasian-looking Vulcans. We had darker-skinned, lighter-skinned Klingons eventually, on top of foreheads and not foreheads. But all the Andorians, we had moving antenna, not just moving antenna, but antenna that moved from back here to up here to, we had, now we've got biker Tellarites with little horny things. We're getting some species diversity, that kind of is more realistic. Some of it designed, some of it is a retcon. But yeah, the whole thing about Klingons, all the other aspects of Klingon society that never get the headlines and never get the story points, like we were saying, everything from musicians to lawyers and scientists, and they all, once you get them cornered along, like Antak, who was the poor augment doctor trying to save his people and getting no respect for it. Anytime you get one of them alone, they'll tell you all about how they get no respect. They're the Rodney Dangerfields of Klingons.
I don't get no respect.
They have a warp drive level culture. They have to have all those aspects, to make the culture go. If they're going to compete with the Federation and its, collective, much less the Romulans and Cardassians and everybody else, they've got to have a functioning society. So I think we can bring it back to mental health. It's like, what's the cost they have paid for this overarching? I mean, if you want to get tokenly historical, you could, look at the Romans, look at the Nazis, look at anybody who was all about the warrior soldier caste and what costs they paid for downplaying everything else, to their peril. And anyway, so maybe the reform started to come with Praxis blowing up. And I don't know. That's, Star Trek development-wise, that's where we started to see not just the détente with the Federation, but also feeling like other people had a breath. Although in the Next Generation times, you're hearing from, again, doctors and lawyers and scientists that they get no respect. But it seems to be better than it had been before. So,
yeah. Well, let's use as a jumping off point to talk about some aspects of Klingon culture that we've seen that are really notable here. You outlined a lot in our prep, Larry, which is I think really I want to dive through these one by one a little bit.
Which is good because I feel like with Klingons, it's like, I don't know, Vulcans and Klingons are the two most explored cultures, although Ferengis and Cardassians are coming along quickly. But yeah. Klingons are the original deep dive culture in Star Trek.
Oh, yeah.
Much you could go on with. But yeah,
I think when you close your eyes and you think of Star Trek aliens, you see two aliens right in front of you. You see a Vulcan and you see a Klingon. That's your go-to, I think, for a lot of people. So we know that first contact with Klingons did not go well. We know that humans were very, very ill-prepared to interact with Klingons.
Well, they were very human.
They were very human. What do you think it was that led to that disastrous first contact between humans?
It shows it's a perfect illustration of first contacts on Earth, especially between like colonial powers and natives wherever they find them, even if they're not intent on day one from like destruction and plunder and genocide. But it shows how the humans were trying to do the right thing, but they were doing it in human eyes, and it's a culture clash that wasn't even intended. They go to all the Sturm und Drang and drama to retrieve this injured Klingon, get him home, leave no man behind, leave no one behind. And they take him home, and the Klingons spit in his face. It's basically like, oh, why didn't you leave him to die, you moron? We have no respect for him. We have no respect for you. And the humans are like, well, this is an alien concept. Exactly. So, Yeah, it didn't get off on the, but it right there shows. Here's the thing. I wanted to say this also out of the gate. We talk about mental health from an alien perspective,
Yeah.
and we're picking Klingons. Well, like with all Star Trek, all the different species and all the different any aspect of Star Trek is limited by our human imagination, and even more so by what's going to sell on American TV, whatever the business model is this decade. So we're all telling stories about ourselves into the future. And when we try to, we have had, alien life concepts, the space going amoeba or the glowy thing, energy ball that is the vampire, the hate vampire. We've seen all kinds of different, non-corporeal, we've seen all that. What we tend to get into and hang around with are all the bipedal humanoids with bumps on their heads, whether they're smoother than bumpier at different times. So everything we talk about Klingon mental health, I feel like we're still looking through a mostly human lens at it, and not really looking. Because how are we going to conceive of an alien culture and how it functions, much less getting inside the mind of that weird, culture that may not look like us at all or operate in a physical sense that way. So that's like the first caveat, right? So it just feels like every time we talk about alien mental health vis-a-vis the Klingons, it's like we're really talking about aspects of our human culture that they're portraying. But having said that, to look at it through an alien point of view, it's definitely this whole thing about the warrior thing from day one of their DNA development. It rings true. But I just wanted to say that up front.
Yeah, I think
really scratching the surface. The spectrum of alien life that we're talking about on Star Trek is like, everything from denobulans to it's like, no, that's a narrow range.
There's a lot there to unpack, Larry.
Spectrum range, and that's the budget spectrum range, right there.
Well, and we have a in-canon explanation for that too. In Star Trek: The Next Generation, The Search, is that the episode? No.
The Chase.
The Chase. Thank you. In The Chase, we have an explanation that there is this ancient race that looks a lot like the Changelings that seeded the Alpha Quadrant, and probably more with their DNA. And so all of these species that we've seen, humans, Cardassians, Klingons, Vulcans, we're all interrelated, which explains why we have our makeup budget as we do on Star Trek. So there's that explanation. But you mentioned Klingon First Contact as a parallel for human First Contact, and I would argue that the Klingon First Contact actually went better than most human First Contact did. If you look at Christopher Columbus and the settling of the United States, they did not see the people who were living here as being equals, as being human. And they also brought along viruses and illnesses that destroyed a vast quantity of people. So from that comparison, this went better.
Well, and I was going to say, you can throw in the Spanish conquistadors 200-300 years before that. You've got the British in Australia. Yes, you've got all over the globe.
But there's a key part here, which is language. Language and the meaning of, Hoshi was there to translate some of the stuff, but language you have to interpret, and to be able to interpret language, you really need to have a understanding of the meaning behind those words, the culture in which that language is created, and they did not have that.
Yes.
Larry, I'm getting some static on your end.
Okay.
Would you mind going out and coming back in?
I can do that. I also had people saying I might be out of sync.
Okay, well, let's see.
Maybe you can dive into the chat while I'm doing this.
That's a great idea. I will do that, and Larry will be back very soon.
Yes.
So while we're waiting for Larry to rejigger the gigawatts, I just wanted to, I think the first episode that folks said was Parallels as a favorite Klingon episode, which, I think Zahir mentioned that. And that's probably one of my favorite Star Trek episodes right over there. I'm a big sucker for parallel universes and different stories. Dan mentioning Night Terrors was a good showcase of Klingon mental health. The lack of REM sleep is affecting everyone. Looks like we've got Larry is calling back in. Let me connect Larry here with the show.
Did that help any better?
Let's find out.
Okay.
Still hearing it a little bit, Larry.
Huh.
Don't know what happened there. I think we're getting some subspace interference.
I think so. Lieutenant, I said code 2.
Do you want to try again?
Well, all right. If it's that, because on my end I'm not hearing anything, but I'll trust you, I guess.
Maybe doing a restart might help. Restarting the warp core on your end?
Of Skype?
Sure, let's start with that.
I have not made the great migration to the new iMac yet, so if I restart, I'll see you at the end of... You can do a full watch along, and I'll be with you.
I'll tell you what, maybe close out your Skype and then come back in. Let's see if that helps.
Okay. But good. I should have said, we reminded, we feel like we haven't been eyeing the chat as we go along. So yeah, do a quickie dive.
We're in the chat. Don't worry. We are exploring. We are fully making contact. All right. Dan mentioned Night Terrors as well. Dan is mentioning here the story of Worf. He's a character that in most episodes of all of Trek, therefore all of Star Trek is the Worf saga. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. I like that argument. That all of Star... I think that argument really works because, look, you've got the original series, which is really setting the foundation for the Worf saga, because it's setting the foundation for who the Klingons are, their relationship with humans, and then the movies, especially with the original series cast, most of the movies feature Klingons. So you have Star Trek the Motion Picture has Klingons briefly. Star Trek 3 features the Klingons heavily. In Star Trek 4, they're on a Klingon ship. Star Trek 5 features Klingons. And Star Trek 6 is all about Klingons. So I think that argument is a really sound one, Dan. I think it completely... Star Trek is the Worf saga. Let's bring in Larry. He's back. All right, Larry, let's see how this...
I don't know. Any better? Any better at all?
Still hearing it. Still hearing it, Dr. Trek.
And it wasn't there at the beginning?
No.
Interesting. Sorry.
I'm sorry, my friend.
Is it really annoying?
I think it might be. Do you want to attempt a restart or something?
Okay. Well, it'll be, I swear to God, it'll be like 10 minutes.
Oh, I can jump into the counselor's log.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's nice knowing everybody. We'll see you.
Larry will be back soon. I have full confidence in his ability to reprogram that LCARS database. He'll be back. He'll be back. Soon you'll see. Larry will come back to the show with me. He'll be back. All right. I guess that's a... All right. Libby says, I want to be a member of the House of Quark. What a wonderful episode that was. But Dan, just to finish it off, your Worf saga. So we have all of the original series kind of setting up the stage for Klingons. We see Worf's ancestor in Star Trek VI representing Captain Kirk as well as Dr. McCoy. And then we have Next Generation, which is Worf is heavily featured there, transitioning to Deep Space Nine, where Worf is heavily featured. and then Worf continues into the movies, and probably is an ambassador somewhere now. I like your theory. That is a beautiful TED Talk. Well done. Yeah, so Rebecca's asking about what about Ash's mental health, being both Klingon and being human. I think we could spend a lot of time talking about Ash and what's happened. You know, it's hard to unpack that because it doesn't completely make complete sense to me what happened. But what seems to happen is a lot of trauma. He has really been physically and mentally tortured in a lot of ways. Beyond that, I have a hard time kind of diving into what Ash has really experienced because it's so out there. It doesn't quite make complete sense. Rebecca was kind of fact-checking us here. 2 hearts, 23 ribs, 2 spines, and yes, 2 gonads. That is true. I'm assuming that's true for all genders of Klingons. All right, folks, let me jump ahead to the comments section. I want to make sure I'm not so behind. Rebecca says, I still want to know what's hanging behind Ali. Oh, this stuff. This stuff, Rebecca? You want to know about this stuff? Would you like a little tour? I could give you a tour. Well, apparently this is a little bit of a tangent in our Klingon mental health episode. So, Rebecca, this thing, right there. This is an old French sci-fi postcard. I believe they're all people on, they're all trying to shoot to the moon. So it reminds me a lot of Méliès's Voyage to the Moon, that very old, probably one of our first science fiction films. So I really love that postcard. This is a picture of a motor neuron. It's a diagram of a motor neuron, I should say, and it is representative of the very first discovery of neurons. This is a art print. I'm blanking on the name of the artist right now, but it kind of reminds me of, I think it's called The Wanderer or something like that. It kind of reminds me of kids wandering and playing and good times. Someone here needs to be able to identify what that is. So I'm going to come back. Whoever can guess what that is, you're going to get a Vulcan high five from me. This right over here is an autograph by the actor who played Batman in Star Trek. Not Star Trek. Yes, the actor who played Batman in Star Trek. Yes, that makes total sense. No, the actor who played Batman in Batman the Animated Series, which was a big entry into my world of geekdom. Right over here, that is a graph that shows the effectiveness of exposure therapy. That was the very first experiment of exposure therapy, which is the main way in which we treat anxiety disorders. Mary Cover Jones was the psychologist who did this close to the 1920s, I believe she was doing this, 1920s or 30s. And here you had a lot of other people who were using behavioralism to inflict anxiety and to show how anxieties are formed. And Mary Cover Jones came along. She doesn't get the credit she deserves. She came along and said, hey, I think we can use this science to help people and we can undo anxiety. And that is from her paper that shows, yes, in fact, this works. I also have a hoverboard. And there's some more stuff, but I think that gets you a gist. Okay, did anyone figure out what this is? Has anyone figured that out? Yes, Scott got it. It's the Next Generation Bridge concept by Andy Probert. Let me see if anyone else got it. Scott, I just see that you got it. Scott, you mentioned it a couple of times. Anyone else? No, just Scott. Scott, nice work there. Way to get it. This is for you, Scott. This Vulcan high five, it's all yours, my friend. I love that concept art. I think it's really beautiful. And there's two things I really love about it. Let me see if I can actually make this work. Let's see. We're going to try to do something a little while here. No, I've kind of got it. It's kind of stuck to the wall because I had to tip it to be at a certain angle so it doesn't reflect light. But if you Google it, you can see it. And the captain has a gigantic mug of what probably looks like coffee, but maybe it was tea given how they wrote Picard's character. He's got a giant mug on the bridge of the Enterprise. And there's also a giant trash can on the Enterprise as well. I look at it as a trash can. It's right next to where Counselor Troy sits. So those two details about that just really crack me up. All right, folks, let me get back into the comments here. Let's see, what are we talking about? Oh, Libby's got a cool comment here. Ferengi are a bundle of anxiety. Klingons seem to be the opposite. Humans in the middle. Sometimes I think Ferengis are quite confident. I think their mental health very much fluctuates as their bank accounts do. And so those who are doing better seem to have more confidence and more, they're more self-assured. And then those who aren't doing as well seem to be struggling more. Yeah, Tim, it's a hoverboard. I'd like to show you how it works, but it's quite risky to activate a hoverboard indoors. I'm glad you appreciated that little tour, Rebecca. And Jana, yeah, Batman and Star Trek, best performance ever. Oh, man. Okay. Why don't we actually jump into some mental health stuff here, folks? How about that? How about we do that? Okay, so I want to jump into. Let's talk about some of the other Klingon stuff we see. All right, so we know that. Thank you for enjoying that tour. Thank you for all of that. So we know that status as family and honor and tradition, these things are really super important to Klingons. In fact, one of the worst things you can do to a Klingon is Larry knows this word. Maybe some of you all know this word. Discommendation, is that the word? Discommunicate, something like that. But we see that this is something that happens to Worf in this episode of Next Generation, where he's basically expelled from a Klingon house. Like, his name can't be mentioned. He is basically does not exist. So we know that status is super important, and honor. We know that the Klingons are also really, to live a honorable life means that you have brought glory to the Empire, to your house, that you have not lived as a coward. And as Larry was mentioning, medicine among the Klingons is quite poorly developed. We see this when Worf gets injured. He has this back injury, and he asks Riker to help him engage in this, in his own death, in this culturally sanctioned suicide. And I just want to mention that there are aspects of both of these things that we have seen in human culture. So there are a lot of human cultures that are focused on tradition, on honor, on duty, these types of things. And one of the things that we found is, especially in areas where you might not have a working justice system, and even in countries where you have a working justice system but it doesn't seem to be just, people will engage in more honor-based approaches to justice. And people do a lot of things that we see in the Klingon Empire. So we see this in Deep Space Nine. This is actually kind of gets to the House of Quark episode, where if a member of your house was killed in an unjust way, and for Klingons, you have the right to go out and seek revenge. And that exists in human culture as well. In places where there isn't a working justice system, that happens. And we know that when it comes to death and ways of dying, this is all heavily culturally based. It's highly influenced by religion, by society, by these different expectations. We also see this with Klingons when they have very specific traditions around death and dying. And if this was an early Star Trek Next Generation episode, you can see by Worf is still in his red uniform there and his old sash. But when Klingons die, they have this, the Klingon death chant, death cry. These are the times where I really need Larry to step in and be like, Ollie, it's this word. It was in this episode and this word. So we see that in Klingons, and that is also a good parallel to humans. For some reason, the Kirk quote, "How we approach death is nearly as important as how we approach life," or is it the other way around? How we approach life is nearly as important as how we approach death. I don't know. It's one of those. But these beliefs around what we do, how people can die, and what we do with death. These are very much human ideas as well. Dan is saying, there's no greater enemy than one's own fears. Martok. Oh man, Martok is so good. He's one of my favorites right over there. So we also let's see. Oh, this was. I believe, who was asking about this earlier? Libby, I think you were asking about the augments. Here we see the Klingon doctor and working with Phlox, trying to solve this augment-related virus right over there. So let's get into the counselor's log here. I've got some stuff I wanted to say and to share with you all about mental health. I know we're all over the place here today, folks, but, we're doing the best we can. So let's jump into the counselor's log. This is where I do a deeper dive into the mental health aspects of everything that we're talking about today. And today, obviously, we are talking about Klingon mental health and what we can learn from that. So, folks, we've spent all this time talking about mental health on Life Support Live, but I don't think we've ever even defined what mental health actually means. So I want to do that for you all, because this is going to be a big part of what we mean by Klingon mental health. So this definition I love, because it seems to be the best definition that captures all aspects of mental health. So this comes from mentalhealth.gov. Did you know that? Did you know the United States has a official government website about mental health? It's been around for a very long time, and there's some cool resources up there, so you can check it out, mentalhealth.gov. Mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we think, feel, and act. It also helps to determine how we handle stress, relate to others, and make choices. So there's a lot there. How does that relate to Klingons? What does that say about us? How can we learn from that? There's a lot of stuff I want to unpack with you all right now about that. So thank you, Ethan. It's at least how we approach death is at least as important as we approach life. Yes. Klingon mental health. Hit yourself with a paint stick. We're gonna get to that. So let's break down this definition. So mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. Let's just start with that emotional part. So, what we know about emotions, how they exist here with humans, and probably how it exists with Klingons, is there are some things that we all experience. We all experience sadness. We all experience some joy, surprise, disgust, anger. Those are some pretty common emotions. But when you start to expand beyond that, there's a lot of debate about what emotions are universal and what emotions might be unique to different cultures. My favorite example of this comes from Germany. I don't know if anyone, if there are any German members of the community here online right now. If you are, let me know. But the Germans have a lot of words for emotional states that don't exist in other cultures. So Schadenfreude is one of my favorite examples. If any of you have watched Avenue Q, you'll remember that Schadenfreude, it's feeling better when others feel blue. So it's the emotional state of feeling good because someone else is like struggling in some way or has experienced a setback or something like that. Your culture can influence these different emotional states. Your language influences emotional states. So if you have a language that does not have a word for emotional state like Schadenfreude, you are not going to really experience that as much as someone who does have that as a part of their culture. Germany, no. German language as my mother tongue, yes. So hopefully I have, I mentioned, I did justice to Schadenfreude there. But speaking of mother tongue, your language highly influences the way you experience emotions. Emotions are they're a very quick way of your body responding to things that are happening around you or things that are happening inside of you and creating a label for that. If your language doesn't have a label that completely describes what you're experiencing, you're going to experience that thing less. So language influences all of this. So getting back to, I believe, let's see, who was it in the comments who just mentioned this? Someone is mentioning pain sticks. I think it was Sean. Sean, were you mentioning pain sticks? But the Klingons probably have words to describe different aspects of pain, of honor, of glory that do not exist in human culture. Shame, these kind of things, like we see Klingons talk a lot about that stuff, and this gets back to that first contact situation with the humans and Klingons. The humans could not understand why they wouldn't want their wounded to be returned to the Klingon Empire. The level of shame that brings, that like one of our own has been lost on this planet, that that person did not take their own life. They were captured by this enemy. All of these things, humans do not have the language to completely understand that. We just don't, and you see that with Hoshi. She really struggles to try to understand what the heck the Klingons were talking about. And this probably extends to other emotional states within Klingons. Ideas of pain and what pain means. I'll give you an example. Let me have some more coffee. I usually have more coffee while Larry's talking. So since we separated the saucer, and I guess I'm the battle half of the ship, and Larry's the saucer section, I have to have my coffee. I have to create a break for that. But what was I talking about? I was about to say something really cool. Oh man, this is what happens when you're going solo. I was talking about Klingon First Contact. I was talking about emotions, and I was talking about oh man, I completely lost it. Oh, and looks like Larry's trying to call me. Let's see, let me bring him in. Let's see how this works. Larry, you are back on Life Support Live.
Well, the camera was never the issue, apparently. Is that any better on the audio?
Yeah, you sound good right now.
Okay, well, it's amazing what a 15-minute vacation will do.
Larry, we are in the counselor's log, and you missed out on. I was talking about coffee, and I was about to say something really. You also missed a tour of the office as requested. And then I was about to say something really important, and I completely forgot what I was about to say, and then you're back.
I'm sure someone will remind you. Can you flip us, just so we match our name?
I can flip you.
Okay.
Let me see.
I can take it.
And there we go. There we go. We're back. We're back to normal, folks. Back.
Let's not get carried away. Define normal.
I'm trying to. That's actually what I was exactly trying to do. So I gave folks the definition of mental health. Mm-hmm. And this first part, mental health, includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. So culture, folks, influences how we experience these emotions, but then it also influences what's expected, what's typical, and what's atypical. And so what sticks out to us about the Klingon culture when we're looking at it is their emphasis on pain, on fighting, all this sort of stuff. This is, Larry, I remembered what I was about to say.
You're welcome.
Thank you. You're welcome for a little Moana. Any parents out there probably have the Moana song stuck in their head like I do. Whenever someone says you're welcome, all I hear is The Rock singing that song from Moana. Pain. So we fundamentally do not understand what Klingons mean about pain. And I'll give you an example. When we often think about pain, we think about something that is that we don't want to experience, that's telling us about some kind of injury or danger. But there are contexts, social contexts, in which pain is experienced completely differently. Mm-hmm. And if you ever go to the gym and you work out, or you're exercising in some way, your understanding of pain is completely different. You grow through pain. Pain is your muscles getting stronger. And this is when some of the best advice that I got in trying to understand what my wife was going through when she gave birth to our daughter was, there's a lot of pain, and pain is one way in which your body grows, and it changes and it transforms to whatever the task is at hand. So folks, we see the pain sticks, as I believe Sean was mentioning. We see the Klingons, very unhygienically, cut their wrists and then share blood and all this stuff. They really need some public health folks there.
Think of Worf's, I forget if they had a specific name, somebody will tell me, but all the groom rituals before, right? Putting everybody through agony with him.
Yes. Yeah. Agony, pain, all of this stuff. There's a cultural foundation which is informed by their biology and by where Klingons live and all of these, by their environment and all this stuff. But their fundamental understanding of pain is so different than ours. In much the same way that your understanding of your own pain is different when you're in the gym than it is when you get a paper cut or something like that. So culture completely informs all of that. It also, so the next part of this definition, mental health affects how we think, feel, and act. So the way in which you cope with your challenges and the ways in which you get help are completely informed by culture. They're completely informed by religion, and we see that with Klingons. That Klingons do have all these redundant systems. They have this really fast metabolism, I'm guessing. They have a lot of stuff pumping through their body, And the way Klingons cope with distress is quite different than the way humans cope. And Larry, I think there's a great episode from Star Trek Deep Space Nine that really shows us this. I think one of my favorite episodes that brings back some Klingons that we haven't seen since the original series. Mm-hmm. Do you know which one I'm talking about?
The Blood Oath.
The Blood Oath.
Yes.
I love that this episode shows us not only classic Klingons from the original series, but it also shows us the ways in which they struggle and the ways in which they get help, the ways in which they resolve their challenges. The Klingons are a highly social species. They're highly social.
They are.
Yeah, they we see this with Worf. You know, we now have this thesis that Star Trek is the saga of Worf. Yeah. That was brought up in our comments today. And the worst thing that can happen to a Klingon is suffering alone in misery. They need to be with each other to support each other. And they don't talk through their differences. They have to resolve their differences. So in much the same way as humans, when some of us are stressed, we need to go for a run or a bike ride or, do something active. Same thing with Klingons. When they are, the worst thing you can do to a Klingon is reduce their social status in some way or their house status. They're very much focused on their houses, on their families, on their clans. And when a Klingon's status and their clan status has been reduced in some way, the way to address that is to address that, is to in some way restore honor to your house. Humans can't quite understand that because our societies work differently, but that being said, in the 21st century, they work differently. But there are examples of that here on Earth where there are different cultures that definitely work that way. So one more thing I want to say about that is access to care is highly influenced by culture. So in the United States, we often have these traditional ideas of what mental health means. You're going to see a therapist or a doctor or something like that. In other cultures, and even within the United States, mental health comes through going to religious services. Mental health means playing a game of basketball with your friends. Mental health means I'm going to go make something for a while, or I'm going to go on a individual quest. I'm going to leave the community.
Go to walkabout.
Yeah, I'm gonna go figure out this thing, and I'm gonna come back. The way you take care of yourself is highly influenced by your culture. And the last thing I want to say here, Larry, and then I want to turn it over to you. There's this idea of acculturation, which is what happens when different cultures come into contact with each other. We see that with Worf and B'Elanna. Is they both, in some ways, have a Klingon identity. In some ways, they have a human identity. In some ways, they're informed by Klingon culture, and in some ways, they're informed by human culture. And what I love about Worf and B'Elanna is that's a pretty accurate representation of how we all experience culture. A lot of times, culture gets boiled down to you're either assimilated as a part of the majority culture or you're not. And that's not how culture works. We all have many different identities within us, and in some ways, we integrate those identities. In some ways, they're very far away from each other. In some ways, we assimilate to one and forget another. I'll give you an example here. Worf, there's some things that Klingons do, or some things that Worf does, that are so ultra Klingon, right? So we've talked about...
You have that where, it's a lot like Spock. I've been thinking.
Yeah.
But it's like when you're of a mixed world, mixed cultures, sometimes you're the uber Klingon. And the other Klingons will say that. They'll even mock him and make fun of him, even lovingly or antagonistically. That, and people like Dax will look at him and say, "God, my God, you're more Klingon than any Klingon I've ever known." Like,
yeah,
Sating or whatever.
Yeah, and so like his
condition. What do you mean?
He grew up on Earth, right? He was raised by humans.
He grew, part of it was on a farm world, but it was a human colony. But yes,
right, a human colony with his parents. His adopted parents were humans, right? And he's a darn good warrior, and we know that is a highly valued trait in Klingon society. So in that aspect of his culture, he's quite assimilated to Klingon culture. Same thing with his love of blood wine, of Klingon cuisine. His language skills as a Klingon are quite proficient. He speaks Klingon so well and speaks English quite well. Like, he's equally fluent in both. He's integrated when it comes to language, right? And there's other aspects that are so not Klingon. He loves prune juice.
It's a warrior's drink.
It's a warrior's drink.
Rebranding by Worf. Del Monte loves him. Yeah.
I know, right? If they're still around in the 21st century. He very much is, his first duty is to Starfleet. And we see how much he struggles with that. He's really not the best Klingon dad when it comes to Alexander. And when you look at Alexander's story, he is someone who's experienced a lot of what we would call acculturative stress. The stress that comes from the collision of these different cultures. And his story is about one where he's very separated from his Klingon identity, and he finds a way of integrating them by the end of Deep Space Nine. So I just want to say, Worf and also B'Elanna, we see the stress more so with B'Elanna than I think with Worf. But they're beautiful examples of how much mental health can be informed by what happens when you live in a bicultural environment. I've said a lot of stuff, Larry. I'm gonna shut up for a little bit.
No, that's good. I just maybe you talked about this during my my walkabout today. But the other thing about Klingon society, and maybe it's a signal to their cultural mental health, if not individual reactions, is we've got so many cultures of varying development in Star Trek, but we have it's almost a joke, all the Klingon rituals. So if a society is that into ritual, without opening up a whole new textbook here, what does that say about the society as far as its mental health? Because it seems like ritual is a way to, I don't know, if there's such a warrior culture and what that means, and even though they're bred for it and they self-select for that and they honor that among other endeavors, it almost seems like ritual is a way to patch over, to cling on to all the disruptions that kind of a lifestyle is going to. Even if you revel and you love constant battle, whether it's individual battle or it's group battle, tribe against tribe or planet against planet.
Yeah.
Is ritual a thing that gets you through rough times? Because it's another token Klingon joke that there's a ritual to adopt a kid. There's a ritual to commit suicide by yourself. There's a ritual to commit suicide by somebody else. There's rituals for weddings. Obviously, I don't think we've ever seen a Klingon funeral. Well, we've got the howl for the dead after someone dies. I mean,
howl for the dead. Yes, thank you. I was struggling to. No, there's a better word. Isn't there Klingon death chant or cry or something? Isn't there?
They're warning Sto-vo-kor that another warrior is approaching. But
right.
All the Klingon, the whole Klingon, maybe because battle, you're expected to go battle, and the upshot of that is it's better to die, right, than be an injured weakling. Like the way, I don't know if you've still got access to we're talking about all these things. If you've got the pictures that I pulled last night.
Yep.
But all the whole bit about Klingon reaction to, maybe you talked about the Klingon reaction to not being 100%, to being injured, to even being handicapped and disabled, where you cannot fight or where you can barely function anyway, and how you're just cast aside as a drain on society.
Right.
How Worf is, there's a ritual suicide for when you can live, but you don't want to, the way Riker's refusing to. There's a culture clash. His human Federation ideals and ethics aren't letting him enable Worf's Klingon ritual. But anyway, in a big way, it's kind of like Elizabeth Warren, and I've got a plan for that. It's like rituals. You say anything of aspect of a social daily life to a Klingon, it's like, I've got a ritual for that. I mean, what does that say about their mental health individually and as a group? Anything?
So yeah, well, the first thing I want to
it seems like they've developed to be not crutches, but bridges to get through a life that's dedicated to constant turmoil. Through, even though they see it as not turmoil as a disruption, they see it as the ultimate continuity of life is to always be in battle and to be in combat. But there are still real world tolls for that. So it feels like ritual is a way to smooth over the inevitable travails that kind of life is going to bring. I mean, does that make any sense? I hadn't thought about this until just now. So maybe
I think that's a really great insight, that for a civilization that has a lot of turbulence in its society, in its empire, in its internal politics. I mean, on the one hand, you had Romulans, right, who seem to never really change that much, even though their politics are so complicated. On the other hand, you have the Klingons, who are constantly in the state of flux, but their rituals are so similar. Like, they don't change much, right? Like, these cultures are so very different in how they are both similar over time and change over time. I think that's a really great insight, that the Klingons, perhaps their beliefs, their culture, their rituals are one way to bring order and consistency across change. So I'm gonna say two things. I want to say one thing in canon, and I want to say one thing that's very contemporary, related to where we are right now in the United States and in other parts of the world. So in canon, we see all these rituals, ritual conflict, this and that. Humans are traditionally very tribal as well. We really like the groups we belong to. We dislike other groups. And over time, we might be able to overcome those differences, but it's difficult. It takes a lot of contact, empathy, understanding, stuff like that. But Larry, every society has developed ways of working through some of this conflict in much the same way that the Klingons do. That, like, if you dishonor each other, they have these fights and battles against each other. Humans definitely did that. We saw that in, I sang horribly a little bit of Hamilton earlier. You saw that with duels in the United States, right? That's what you missed. You missed you missed the Office tour and me singing "You'll Be Back."
Is anybody left sober in the chat?
If it helps, I kind of dedicated that song to you, Larry, that you'll be back, and here you are. But we have developed other ways of working through that conflict. So some of those ways are like our legal systems and stuff like that. But Larry, I think there's a much simpler way in which our lives parallel Klingons, and that's through sports. Sports are a fantastic invention that allows us to work through our own tribal stuff. We can have allegiance to a team. We can follow them, and through that we can kind of work out this need to be tribal that exists in us. And you might not be a sports fan, but there might be other things that you do follow in similar ways. Maybe it's franchises, maybe it's these stories, maybe it's Star Trek versus Star Wars, all this kind of stuff. But we have invented ways of working through our own tribalness in much the same way that Klingons have. So that's the in-canon thing I want to say. The out-of-canon thing that I want to say is the conservatism that we might see in Klingons, which has persisted their culture and their rituals. It works in similar ways as conservatism should in the general population. That there are some people whose personalities are much more liberal, and they don't have as much, they don't see the need to keep things the same way as they've always been. And then there's some people whose personalities lean more conservative, and they really value tradition. And in a well-functioning society, you have an equal mixture of those. Right. And some people are able to say, we need to move forward in these ways. And then some people are able to say, let's make sure we stay true to these traditions. They're here they bring some sense of order to society. In the United States, we've definitely become, there's a sorting problem where the people who are more conservative have been sorted into certain regions, and people who are more conservative have been sorted into different regions. So we have the split. So we're not functioning that well because we don't have that mixture of folks who are able to talk to each other, get along, figure out ways of moving forward. The Klingon society has probably done a better job of staying true to its traditions, and having that persist. You could also make the argument maybe to its detriment, because maybe there are things they need to move forward, like gender. I don't think we've seen a few female chancellors. We saw that in Star Trek Discovery and in Star Trek VI, but there's not a lot of female leadership in the High Council. So
they seem to have fairly decent equality until you get to the just very highest levels.
Yes, which sounds pretty familiar, does it?
Right, as evolved as we are. But no, and that's something I hope they keep playing with. Although if they're running around, 930 years in the future on Discovery, we won't see L'Rell. I'd love to see Mary Chieffo again as L'Rell. But I mean, you have that thing where, we've had like women governors when the husband died, who was the governor, and that's the case of the. Well, it hasn't happened recently, but it used to happen all the time in senators. Senators die and they put the woman in. His wife fills out the term or whatever. And you had that a little bit with Ajitbur after Gorkon in 6. You had the daughter take over for the dad. And that was like but by the time of Next Generation, they needed it for a story point about there's no women on the council. Mm-hmm. But you just you feel like that's just a political thing. And one other thing we haven't talked about really, because it really didn't come in, I just realized this. Even though it's economic, another thing that's affecting Klingon society and culture, as much as they like to think it's all about fighting and honor and all of that underlying, but they very much have socioeconomic levels. We were talking a little bit about the tribes and aside from who's the biggest and who's smaller or who's better fighters and not, there's a thing about, the House of Quark exposed this a little bit. You have that wonderful scene where he's got them all trying to follow along on pads like accountants, and Gowron says, enough! And they pitch I love that moment.
I love that moment, too.
And they all look like they're all thumbs. But they know, and the guy who's challenging Groka, he's all about the material stuff. He knows. And he's, they originally, they finally turned Klingon law on him and talk about how dishonorable he is for being that way. But it's still, Kurn gets despondent. He loses the title, but he's also, they didn't just take the title away and kick him off the council. They took his stuff. He had to liquidate his houses and his physical houses and his lands. It sounds so medieval, Middle Ages. But I mean, they have a materialism because it's a sign of status, and so that goes along with it. But you have all this talk about how Gowron was an outsider and not a politician, and then he becomes really political. But how Martok was a lowly, his house, he was middle class. He was from out in the boonies, and he was a general, so he got it. It's almost like the old British Navy or something, or the Army. He was an outlander that didn't have a landed status, but he earned his status in society by fighting, which is what Klingons you would think do, until you run into the bureaucrats and the politicians.
That's a really good point.
The hypocrisy that's up and down, which Worf seems like he's always exposing, or people are yelling at Worf he should go expose.
It's a really good point, Larry. And someone mentioned Martok way back in the comments, that Martok really came from this lower class, or I would argue it's more of a caste system.
That was the whole thing with Kor as an aged warrior.
Yes.
The Kor was the landed, the gentry, and Martok was not.
Yes. Yeah. A beautiful point. And I think that speaks to some of the problems of I don't want to call them problems, because I'm not in that culture. I'm not in Klingon culture. I don't really. You can't make these judgments about cultures, because it gets back to that horrible first contact that humans and Klingons had. You're talking different languages. You're thinking different things, and we haven't talked about sacred values yet. Rose had a great point earlier here about Klingons depressed or welcoming death when they say it's a good day to die. So, like Klingon depression, we've seen it, and it's usually a warrior is isolated, unable to war, has lost glory or honor, or is like isolated or ostracized. Like that's what Klingon depression looks like. That they've lost meaning and purpose, and they're largely rejected from the rest of their community. And how do we compare that with all the times that Worf says, "Today is a good day to die. Prepare for ramming speed." Sir, there's another starship coming in. Huh? It's the Enterprise. Whoosh, do, do, do. I love that scene.
Worf's really thinking there, right?
Right.
What he's really thinking is, oh boy, bigger budget.
I finally get to be in a movie that worthies the Defiant and the Enterprise.
I have a legitimate reason for being here at last.
Yeah, yes. Although Benjamin Sisko should have been in command of the Defiant at this battle, but I will command it because he's doing important paperwork on Deep Space Nine.
You would not take a TV salary on a movie budget. So there we go. No, can I ask real quick though? Have we ventured into the council? Where are we? Because
we're in the counselor's log. We're about to come out of it, and we're about to go to K3.
That transition.
We're about to get into K3. Before we do, I just want to say that the distinction between Klingon depression and Klingons willing to give up their lives. This gets to sacred values. We haven't talked about that yet, but there are some things that all of us believe that we consider sacred. I'm not talking about sacred in a religious sense. I'm talking about sacred in a psychological sense. There are some things that you will not negotiate over, that you will fight for, that you will protect, you will do whatever you can. Historically, for humans, it's often been land. The land that your family has. The land that you have lived on. When something is considered sacred, like the land that your family has lived on, you can't buy it. It's beyond value.
Yeah.
Say that again, Larry?
I said for generations.
Right. No. Yes. This is often where two people might be in disagreement about land for generations, and a third party will come in and be like, well, you should do this, you should do that. And what they're missing out on is how sacred that land is to the people. In the United States, freedom of speech is often something that's considered sacred. In many countries, your flag might be considered sacred. There's a lot of ways that you can experience things as sacred. In my family, like you take off your shoes when you walk in. That is a sacred value, and it's like not something we will negotiate on, right? But there's diversity to that in different households and all of that sort of stuff. So I want to get back to like honor, duty, and sacrificing yourself for a larger cause, these are sacred values to Klingons. They will give up their life if it's for an honorable cause. And some humans will do that as well, especially those who serve in the military or those who serve the government in some way. Might be willing to give up their life for a cause. So a lot of times we look at these Klingons and we're like, wow, that's so wild, it's so out there. We do the same stuff, folks. We might not be poking each other with pain sticks, but we are definitely working out our conflict through sports or through, debates at Comic-Con, maybe panels about the psychology of Star Trek versus Star Wars.
No, plug anything, but yeah.
Not to plug anything, but...
As you should. No, you mentioned, though, real quickly, we think about conflict and life and death on a Klingon scale, but you just said people dedicate their lives, they sacrifice in the... People serve in military, and that's a human correlation. Mm-hmm. And then you said, or in the government, and we see the level of sacrifice in government when people go out, when people have a principle that's a sacred principle for themselves, and what's the ultimate? It's like it's career suicide or career political suicide when they kill themselves logistically, when they resign, when they say I will not stand for this, and they give up a life, a career. When you see people taking a stand, mm-hmm. They're not fighting.
Whistleblowers.
They're giving up their life, but they're
yes.
giving up the next best thing to their life, which
yes.
is because without the career they work, that they enjoy, that they work on, that means something, those the sacred principles, that if they feel like that's out the window now, then they'll say, well, I'm giving that up, and here's why. And
Absolutely.
That's like they're fighting to death. Only it's in an ethical morality career mode.
I think that's a wonderful parallel, Larry. That's a great parallel, and
We're seeing a lot of that right now too.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Like, what is it that's important to you about this? Zahir says core values. Sokach, his eyes uncovered.
Eyes uncovered. We've been borderline Temerian all day long here. I've been wanting. It has nothing to do with Klingons, but I've just been talking about culture and language.
So,
hey, I don't know I may have backtracked here. I'm looking at the chat, and if I'm pulling out things that you already got to when I was in the away days, but
away days.
Dan Leckie had a point way back about because Klingon a bridging point, because Klingons are stereotypically angry and downbeat in human terms. He says, is there a risk for those who cosplay as Klingons, who like their mental health plays into that, or they become, if they lose themselves in the part, or maybe they were pre-selected for that anyway.
So my colleague that I spoke about before, Dr. Drea Ledamenti, who's on that panel, Psychology of Star Trek versus Star Wars, she's actually done a little bit of research into cosplay and the mental health aspects of cosplay. And if you just look up Psychology of Cosplay, her article is the very first one that comes up. And largely it's all very positive. Like, I wouldn't be worried about it at all. There's this thing called code switching, which basically means in different cultural contexts, you can think and act differently, and you might feel differently. And for many of us, when we cosplay as a Klingon, you might feel more like a Klingon. And that's okay. It's
role-playing, basically.
Yeah. In the same way that we act.
As an escape, as a healthy thing.
Totally. And there's... when it comes to Klingon culture, like, we have to remember there are so many wonderful, positive aspects to it. There's a really great debate that was happening in the comments section about the role of gender and Martok's wife really being in this empowered role. But in House of Quark, we see a Klingon woman who cannot really rule her house without a man, and there's a lot of debate around that. And so Klingon culture is very slow to change, absolutely. At the same time, Klingon culture is one that highly values its family, really takes care of one another. Worf is not a great example of this. Well, maybe he is, because he really does make a lot of big sacrifices for his brother.
He does all kinds of things with Kurn. He adopts Jeremy Astor. Well, I can't remember. I pulled that one out of my memory. He adopts Jeremy Astor, and then he tries to deal with Kurn's ups and downs. Alexander's his big, maybe failing. He circles around, but then
he circles around.
He's got Kalar. That's kind of wrapped up in a little emotional bundle there. But then also later on, when he's all alone, Martok adopts him.
Yeah,
remember?
Yeah. And with Alexander, I want to say that, folks, Worf had a hard time as a child himself. He really did not know his parents. He was raised by humans. He does not know how to be a Klingon father. There's a lot of research around kids who experience trauma growing up. They can have a hard time raising children themselves. I think we see that reflected with Worf, and we see that with Alexander. And he does come around to it. I think Jadzia plays a big role in helping him approach that differently. But there are good reasons why Worf was a bad father, and why he experiences those challenges. I want to share Libby's comment here. Cosplaying a Klingon gave me a lot of confidence I didn't have before. I had people comment on that when I was younger, even non-convention goers, back when we called it costuming. Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Larry, we are well overdue. I think people are dying to hear this. Today's K3 factor.
Okay.
What deep cut are you going to cut for us today?
I have a very personal deep cut, which is perfect for our theme today.
Yeah.
So I think I sent you, and I'm going to just totally lean on this one image the whole time.
Yes.
There is a moment in By Inferno's Light and the two-parter where Worf and Garak is looking for his father in Albertane. The Dominion conflict is going on, or we're close to a conflict. And, I've got wide Panavision here. It's not working out. Can you slide back and forth? Okay, that's good enough. I mean, just, you can't pan back. You can't pan and scan that, huh? There's a moment.
You want me to do this?
Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
You want me to move it around?
No, I meant if it was going to be the whole frame to pan and scan the image. But no, that's good.
I can do this. How about that?
Don't make me seasick. Okay.
Space sick, you mean?
Space sick, yeah. No, there's a moment. This is great about Hollywood as well as Star Trek in our canon. So before this, the two-parter Birthright, right, on Next Generation, was all about Klingons being, here's a cultural thing we haven't hit on, about Klingons being taken captive, will kill themselves rather than be taken captive. And when they didn't kill themselves, they lived in such shame that they would not go home. They wouldn't bring shame to their families because of that culture more. They talk about mental health. Right. So that group that were captured didn't feel like they had a way to break out of that. So rather than bringing shame to their families, they hid. And then you found a Romulan who felt sorry for them. Talk about out of their cultures. Yeah. And he sets up this secret colony where he takes care of them, and they agree to be taken. They're already so shamed that they all live there secretly. It's bizarre. It's really bizarre. But that's the extreme of the whole. But that was a two-parter, Birthright. Mm-hmm. And it's how many times did they make the point? It's the whole arc of this. It's the whole reason for this episode. 2 hours, aside from Data's dreaming in part 1. But the bulk of that two-parter is all about Klingons do not let themselves be taken hostage. Klingons will not let themselves be. Klingons will kill themselves before they're taken hostage. If Klingons are taken hostage, it breaks them. It's like the worst thing you can do to a Klingon. One of the 5 things. Yeah. It's like it's horrible. They live in shame. They'd rather live in secret without their families rather than bring you. That's bang. That's a hit you over the head over and over and over again. That's 5th season, Next Generation. Yes. 6th season, 5th season. So fast forward to DS9, where you've got the Dominion War going on, and you have this wonderful plot of of Garak and his father, and he winds up they wind up being taken prisoner. They're in a Dominion prison camp, an internment camp, and they walk in, and everybody is still grappling with there's paranoia about the changelings, and we've even had the episodes about too much paranoia, taking away civil liberties, and all of that balance. But Worf and Garak walk in, and lo and behold, Garak does see his dad. They walk in, and oh my God, there's Martok and Bashir. So now they know. Now wait, if you're Bashir really, then who's the Bashir on the station? Who's the Martok that we? Oh my God, they're changelings. Yeah. So that's going on. But in the middle of all that, for 1 minute, had nothing to do with the plot. But it was back in the days when Janet worked on the shows, and the scripts are sitting there, and the draft scripts are coming by. And one day after work in licensing, I walked over and sat down and picked up a first draft and read it. And it's also back in the days when the NDA that you signed was like, if you blurb about this, you will be fired from all your Star Trek work. That's how we did NDAs. So, but I'm reading the draft script for the internment camp scenes. And I walk in, and here's Worf and Garak, but Worf walks in and sees Martok as a hostage. No one says a word about why did Martok not kill himself. Mm-hmm. And I was reading along, and I went, oh. And Janet's working at her desk, and I'm just sitting there in her chair in the tiny little Heart Building offices. And I go, oh, Martok's a hostage? Why didn't he try to kill himself? And I swear, Janet said, oh, Larry, don't be an anal fan. And I'm like, okay, but I'm just saying people are going to scream about this.
Yeah.
Scream about this. So I let it go. I'm just like, oh, guys. And I knew it was an Ira and Wolfie episode. So it wasn't Ron, Ron, the keeper of all things Klingon, or Ron Moore. But it was an Ira. And, Ira, everybody loves Ira. I was driving the show. But it was one of those little moments that he wasn't around for. He wasn't part of late Next Generation. And the two-parter that hit you over the head that Klingons, okay. But the fandom, that was in 15 episodes. Well, it was really in this one two-parter. But it made a huge impact. So 2 or 3 days go by. Janet comes home and she goes, Larry, what episode was that? I said it was Birthright, part 1 and 2. And she goes, okay. So the next day she comes home with 2 scripts, with Birthright part 1 and part 2 scripts.
Okay.
And she says,
2 different scripts for the same show?
I mean the part 1 and the part 2.
Oh, okay. Those, sure. Okay.
The 2 script, the full script for the 2-parter.
Got it. Basically,
what had happened was her office had the mail slots for everybody, and at one point, this is both about how Star Trek works and about how Hollywood works, and this is about if you want to get how to get things done in the system. You can be a rebel. I or somebody later on could have stood up and screamed about this, but if you know how the system works, what Janet did was when not Ira, but when Ron came in to get his mail the next day, she said something basically is, Ron, I don't know if you know this, but they have Klingon hostages, captives, in Ira's script, and they don't say a word about, what happened, why they're not, why they didn't kill themselves. And, he wasn't working on that script, but she said he just kind of, his eyes got big, like, So she kind of handed the issue off to him. And we're talking about like a tiny, in the big picture of things, right? Tiny little thing.
Yeah.
But in the big picture of things, he got it. So the next time they all had a writer, whatever. So later that day, he had her pull a couple of those scripts. She brought it home to me and she goes, Ron wants you to get the little tabs, the clear tabs you can stick in tag pages, like sign here kind of things. She goes, Ron wants you to take the script and tag every time someone says Klingons kill themselves rather than be taken hostage. I went, and I got what was going on. I went, okay. So, but each script has, especially part 2, because it really is about that. But there's so you look at the side of the script, and there's 15 tags hanging out, right? Where I go tagged it. So the way this happens was, I did that. She slipped back in the vanilla envelope, puts it in Ron's slot, the next day he takes it up and he goes, "You might want to. This is that was proof and visual proof. It wasn't about ego or politics or or da 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 or I'm the Klingon guy." He basically said, "Here's all the times blah blah blah," and the bottom line to all this is, as with most things in Star Trek, it takes one line or two lines. This thing about canon versus the writing, the writers want the freedom to create. Most of the time, you throw one line in, you can keep canon going, you can keep all the Canonista fans happy. So what happens? The episode airs. They don't have to. No plot. Nothing is uprooted. Nobody has to restructure 5 acts. All that happens is Worf and Garak walk in there. Here's the big reveal that it's Martok, and while you're having the intended shock of, oh my God, that means there's changelings back home. In the middle of all that, it's Garak, not Worf, but Garak as the outsider says, wait a minute. I thought Klingons were supposed to kill themselves rather than be taken hostage. And then Worf and Martok together, they've just reunited, but they both say, but no, not when there's any promise at all of fighting future battles. Not when you can still get up and fight. Not when there's still a chance that you can have a say. But, i.e., when it's not hopeless. Like, don't give up. So, all it took was like 2 lines of dialogue, and that was preserved. You didn't hurt the current story or make it redo, but you preserved what had gone before. So
Larry,
that is a cut on this is how you work in a system to get good change done, right? You bridge it and do it. You don't stand up and scream. Sometimes you have to stand up and scream if you're an outsider, maybe. But when you're working on the inside, that's what you do. And B, that kind of thing can happen. And C, the things that drive people crazy later on could have been fixed with one line or a little massage. And one of my Trekland Dr. Trek hashtags is texture, not trivia. When something, say like that hadn't happened, well, somebody out in fandom would have retconned something like that. They would have said, they made a mistake. They didn't have, Martok should have been dead. Why did he still alive? Yeah. And somebody afterward would have said, well, there was obviously something overruled him, killing himself. And they came up with the proactive one that makes all it flies you right by. No one even stops to think about it, really. And it feels good because they've actually built on something in the past. So anyway, that's my K3 deep cut for today. This is how to.
I mean, it's a pretty good one. So I feel like I should thank you for saving that moment. And I'm now gonna refer back to your San Diego Comic-Con panel about the 3 generations of scientific advisors to Star Trek.
It's a science tapestry.
Oh, I'm a sucker for tapestry references, Larry.
Even when they're totally created out of whole cloth.
Oh man, that one. Now you're getting into dad joke territory, which I also appreciate. Your panel. One of my big takeaways from your panel was this idea of yes and, like when you're working within the system of a writer's room, it's not about just saying no, your idea is stupid or this story is dumb because of this canonical reason or because of this scientific reason. It's about saying yes and. So yes, I think this is a great idea to have Worf and Martok as prisoners. And we need to speak to why they might be prisoners and they haven't taken their own lives. And it actually seems to add more texture, as you said, to the story. It extends upon that idea that totally makes sense in Klingon culture. Yeah, breaking out of this Jem'Hadar Dominion concentration camp, knowing the secrets that you now know about these changelings that are out there in the Alpha Quadrant, you better believe that is going to bring honor to your house. You better believe that is going to bring honor to the Empire. Not only is there a chance of escape, but it seems incumbent on the Klingon warrior to get revenge and rectify this very cowardly way of your empire being manipulated.
Well,
it makes total sense.
in that case, if you've got a secret that's a life and death, not just life and death, but a victory snatching secret from the jaws of death, it would almost be cowardly to lean on the old cultural traditional ritual and give up and kill yourself.
Yeah.
Because as I said, when there's still battles to be won and you're able to fight them, when it's not hopeless. So that's my yes. It's because that the root of Texture Not Trivia is an old acting trope that I go back to is, if you're in a comedy, find the moments of drama, or writing too. If you're in a comedy, find the moments of drama. If you're in a drama, find the moments of comedy, levity. Because that's the way real life is, and we're not just stereotypically pouring things out of a mold. That there are exceptions to every rule, and exceptions prove the rule. So when you a case like Worf and Martok here illuminates the greater old ritual even more. So anyway,
love it. I love it. As Karen's just said, for the Empire. So with that, let's get into our away mission. This is the part of the show where I give you a takeaway, something that you can do to apply the lessons that we're talking about as it relates to Star Trek and boldly going in your own life to right now, this situation that you are in right now. Larry, I struggled with this one. How do we...
Hey, Klingons, don't kill yourself. Is that what you were worried?
Like, what do I even talk about? Because we're talking about a alien race that, spoilers, does not exist to our knowledge. There is no Kronos.
For aspects of human society.
So, like, where do we even go for this? So, here's where I came down on, is there are so many aspects to being a Klingon. You can be a warrior. You can bring honor to the Klingon Empire through fighting on the front lines with against the Federation in the original series, against the Romulans later on, against the Dominion, against the Borg, right? You can bring honor that way. You can also bring honor through leadership. We see that with Gowron and later Martok. You can bring dishonor that way as well. Being a Klingon is also about being being a family and being a mother, being a father, training the next generation, no pun intended, by raising children, teaching them. You can bring honor through really good Klingon opera, really good blood wine, really good gach, right? There's so many ways to be a Klingon, and when we see Klingons, we see the batleths and the battle and all of this, but there's so much more to the culture, right? So that's my away mission for you.
I want honor. I can't wait for Lower Decks.
I can't wait. We're going to talk about Lower Decks in just a moment.
We are.
Here's my spoilers. Here's my away mission for you all. Is just like the Klingons, there's so much more to them. There's so many cultural pieces, and the same is true of you. So if you want to explore this, I want you to take 5-10 minutes out of your day. Take a piece of paper. It's better with paper and a pen. You can do this on your computer if you want to, but I like to do this on paper because it just kind of slows down the processing. Write I am and finish that sentence about 10 times. I am a father. I am a Star Trek fan. I am a Trekkie. I am a Trekker. I am a Californian. I am a psychologist. Like I can go on and on and on, and then finish that list 10 times. Like, what is coming up for you? What's high on that list? What's low on that list? What are the expectations of each of those identities? What is considered to be typical? What's considered to be atypical? How do you take care of yourselves in that identity? If you take 5-10 minutes and do this, you're going to get a much better understanding of all the cultural forces that are impacting your life right now. And I also think it can be helpful to understand that there's so much more to you than what you might have thought. There's so many different ways in which you express your identity. Like for Worf, he's a Klingon, he's a Starfleet officer, he's a dad, he's a warrior, but he's also an explorer at times. He's also a strategic officer. He's a husband. He's a friend. He's he's a lover of Klingon opera and prune juice. There's a lot to his culture and his identities, and similarly, there's a lot more to yours as well. So that's one way. If you like to explore it, it's an easy way to do it.
Thank you,
and
sir.
with that, yeah,
yeah,
always my pleasure. With that, let's open up those hailing frequencies. We've got a lot of comments.
Being gone, yes. I want to jump back and say a shout out to my nephew Stephen, who had a point way back here. We were talking about culture and language, and maybe, and stop me if I'm overlapping something you did, but this was after I came back, I think. Anyway, he said, as a linguist, learning other cultures is such a privilege to understand others. In Arabic, there was a phrase, "Ya aberni," so call it, but which means you bury me. In other words, you love someone so much that you hope they outlive you. But that was, but anyway, he's talking about the importance of language as a key to culture. I mean, I think most cultures would agree to that, but they had a specific word for it.
And I think Klingon, a Klingon cultural saying might be like if we take that to Klingons, they would say, I hope you die a honorable death, which doesn't necessarily mean that like you die in battle, but you die at a time when you have brought honor to your family and to the Klingon Empire. So that's a great example of how, like, if a Klingon heard that expression, you bury me, that I hope you outlive me, they'd be like, why? No, not really. Like, I hope you die at a time when you have honor. It's a great example of that connection between language and culture and beliefs and misunderstanding between different groups.
I just had to look it up. It's like the Ferengis have 178 words for rain.
Right. Totally.
Yeah, it's a cultural, yes. I think, you know what, I think it's funny. I think we were talking about some of the suicide rituals. Like, well, am I doing it for myself? Do I get a friend? Do I get a family member? Which suicide ritual is this? And they all have a different knife that all has its own name. So how Klingon is that?
Yeah.
There's a name on a knife for the suicide ritual. Here's 47 different ones. We have to make sure and get the right knife for the right suicide. Yeah.
Scott's saying, I think I would be a really terrible Klingon. And Dan is saying, I'd be an honorable Klingon musician. Who would you be? Who would you be, Larry, if you were a Klingon? Gosh, the Klingons probably don't have therapists. I don't know. You know who I might be?
There might be one, and he's probably a really good one because he's not only the only one they have, but he survived somehow. So,
yeah, I think a Klingon therapist would do a lot of, you must challenge that Klingon to a duel. I think I would be a batleth.
The Klingon therapist has a row of pain sticks in his cabinet that he refuses to use. Refuses to use them. Please give me a pain stick for this. No.
I think I would be like a batleth coach. I would. If I can't be a therapist, I want to be basically like a sports psychologist, someone who helps people with their performance in different tasks. And I think for a Klingon, the greatest performance is hand-to-hand combat. So I want to be like a batleth coach that helps people to be in the zone with their batleths. That's what I would do.
Okay.
What about you, Larry?
Well, I don't know. Somebody would have to keep, if people enjoy singing songs of their exploits and keeping all that going, then somebody there have to be some Klingon scribes. There have to be some Klingon.
Yes.
You don't get ritual out of nothing, and the more that you pass on those crazy, he took a lock of his hair and threw it in the Mount Christak, and bang, the first battle. I mean, somebody had to keep all that going. So I don't know if I would be
You would totally be that person. Yeah.
Musicals and history or whatever.
I just
thought of me too. Another aspect. Klingon. We were talking about music. Klingons have theatrics. Remember the Klingon pageant and the Klingon festival at Worf, and that's a colony. They even have enough actors to have actors on colonies.
Yes.
So then that's what's going on in the colony worlds. Then Kronos is going to have this wonderful thespian tradition. Whatever.
Oh yeah, I
only when they do the original Shakespeare in Klingonese, they're really good.
Yeah.
It's like they go through they're really beheading and stabbing people. Yeah.
I totally see you as a historian of the High Council. I think that would be
job.
You would do so well. Libby says I'd be a Klingon soprano opera singer, and I love this. Tim says a Klingon lawyer. Today is a good day to lie. Nicely done, Tim. Heidi says, don't think a Klingon biologist would be appreciated in Klingon society. You never know.
Sure needed one to fix the virus. So,
some Klingon biologists fixed the augment virus. And they're there. They do things. Like, Klingon society really, in terms of their fleet and the officers that serve on that fleet, those are clearly mostly the warrior class. But they do have these other folks. Like, someone has to build these ships. Mm-hmm. Someone has to solve the augment virus. They're just not front and center in the Klingon society. Scott says, as long as there's Klingon opera, I guess that would be the producer, director, actor, singer, or something. Karen wants to be a Klingon ship officer on the bridge. It can be dangerous to serve on that bridge.
Yeah, can you just see the Klingon prop guy? I said I wanted a Dick Tog, not a actor, not a.
Yeah. And then there's a duel.
Yeah.
Tim says a Klingon cook. Today is a good day to bake. Tim, this could go on for a while. This could. Oh my gosh.
Tournament organizer. Today is a good day to buy.
Sean says a Klingon engineer or cloaking. So, Larry, maybe you can answer this question for me. I was having a debate with my friends. How did the Klingons acquire cloaking technology? Did they steal it from the Romulans? Did they trade with the Romulans, or did they invent it?
There's that. Well, yeah. So we used to say for years and years and years, we always said, oh, the whole excuse around using the Klingon ship model for the Romulan ships in Enterprise Incident, when the whole thing was so new, people barely knew what they were looking at, was that there had been a Klingon. And then they put it in dialogue to explain it, which is funny because people, when you saw the original aired episodes, either you didn't. The first time you saw that ship was as a Romulan. I'm trying to remember now what the deal was, but it was very hinky. It was almost like overkill. But yeah, they tried to retcon some language and say why Romulans were using Klingon ships, because they had an exchange treaty. And so for years we said, well, the Klingons, the cloaking that you see later, because that was an original series. But then you have Enterprise, where there's cloaking going on earlier.
Yes.
Now I'm busy here. Yeah. So anyway. And a lot of people would thought, well, cloaking is not an honorable way to, the whole Klingon honor thing. Well, cloaking is sneaking around, and you're not being out in front, and your opponent isn't seeing you face to face.
Yeah.
But then there's another aspect to that. It's like, well, is that really, is honor about seeing your opponent face to face, or is honor about just being smart enough to have all the tools at your disposal?
Right.
And if that's one of them, then so be it. It's their fault. They're weak. You're doing them a favor by putting them out of commission if they're going to be so weak. They haven't invented a cloaking device yet.
Right.
So.
So, how did they get cloaking technology?
I I'm still yeah. It's in memory alpha. Come on. What do you
Larry, last week you said if I have a Trek question, just text you. And now you're punting it to memory alpha. Maybe our comment section.
I was already gone for 15 minutes. I'll find you an answer, and if there's not one, I'll invent one.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Plus, by the time I get somebody in the chat will pop up and go, well, it was in some episode of Discovery somewhere that I've only seen.
Well, I mean, it kind of speaks to Klingon engineers. Like, even if they acquired the technology through some type of means, they've had to maintain it. So, there are these individuals. Zahir's got a great idea. I want to be a Klingon holo programmer, take oral storytelling to a new level. The Klingons highly value storytelling. They love to sing songs of the great triumph over the Tribbles. They love to. They highly value storytelling. It's a big part of their culture. It's a big part of their religious beliefs. And you have to imagine that Klingons have created some amazing holo stories. I love that. I love that idea. Susan asks, would a Klingon journalist be useful? That's my former profession. I can't imagine that my current job as a disability analyst would be good in Klingon society.
Well, when I said scribe and scribe, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Somebody recording the event. Now, whether it's true journalist or a propagandist, or you expand my glories on my house, and if you want to talk about him, then put him on. Get on his payroll.
I think it would be less journalist and more storyteller, songwriter, that kind of thing. But yeah, absolutely. I think.
And here's the thing: the whole, there's so much Klingon hypocrisy. But at some point, Klingons have to rely on the truth to be able to make battle decisions, right? So you get into things like the Klingon Civil War, the Duras sisters, what's real, what's not, what are reliable battle reports, what are reliable scouting reports and espionage, and there is a Klingon intelligence agency. So that whole thing about cloaking is not honorable. There are Klingon spies. Arn Darvin was a Klingon spy. I mean, at different times, different things, and other ones through the Dominion War too. But
and Star Trek Discovery, we see that. Yeah. I think we've opened Pandora's box a little bit with Tim, Larry. Tim says, a Klingon pilot, today is a good day to fly. And then a Klingon George Takei, today is a good day to, oh my. Tim, thank you for the love of Klingons that you're bringing to the comments section here today. There's another comment, Larry, that someone said if Larry gave us a tour of the office, it might take a few hours. You do have a lot of goodies back there that I hope one day we can get a complete tour of. But, I think if people want to hear more about all the good stuff that you have there is a simple way to get more of that, Larry. Can you tell us about the Corona time?
It's called Finish the K3 Off. No, it's... No, guys, I bring this out from time to time right now. If you want to jump in Portal 47 with me and a lot of our great community, everything Trekland is about, investigating, preserving, protecting, explaining, preserving, stitching together the dots. And we do that a little bit here. Dr. Ali does it with the mental health world here. But if you're ready for that, if that's where your Trek fandom is, I'd love for you to jump into Portal with us. It's like a mini-con all year long, and I can always say, there's nothing like a Star Trek fan that has no idea how much Star Trek they still have no idea about. So anyway, I have a very simple 3-for-2 special here during COVID times. Normally, you sign up for a year, and then we go month to month. But here, it's right now, you can get in for 3 months, and it's basically the cost of 2. And if you go to LarryNemecek.com, it's right there. Click on that, and you can jump in with me and all the other Portales. We have, guest nights, roundtables. When we're able to go live at conventions, we have our live dives at conventions. So anyway, there's like 10 monthly features and a couple of annual discounts and all that kind of thing too. So take advantage. That will end. That's a weekend special that will end at midnight Sunday Pacific time. So if you enjoy what we do here, what I'm doing, if you feel like you'd like to metaphorically explore this room, my office, then jump in the portal with us.
So, Larry, as we start to hear our lovely music, our theme song here, a couple of show notes for next week. We have new Star Trek coming out next week.
We're going to do another radical thing, guys. And I don't mean just have working streaming equipment. I mean something even more radical.
We're going to be exploring our brand new Star Trek series and our first animated series since the 70s, Star Trek Lower Decks. Here's how we're going to be doing it. We're going to use next week's episode, the premiere episode.
Which Thursday, by the way.
Yep, on CBS All Access, and we know not everyone globally is going to be able to access it. We're going to use Lower Decks, next week's episode, as a launch pad for the theme of this show. Whatever happens in the premiere, we're going to use that as a point to explore other topics of mental health, not only in Lower Decks, but in all of Star Trek
we'll expand
fandom.
It to the full canon, but
yeah, because we want to make it inclusive and welcoming for those of you who can't see Lower Decks, but we also want to make it timely and fresh for those of you who are watching Lower Decks. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a little bit different, but folks, we have new Star Trek, and we're going to have new Star Trek for the next 23 weeks for the whole run of Lower Decks and Star Trek Discovery.
Season 3. I need to point this out. Even in the days when there was a 26-episode season, right, of the original, and especially of the Berman era, even in those days, this is 23 straight weeks coming up. Even in the old days, you would have holiday breaks and repeat breaks. We've never had 23 straight weeks of original Trek in a row, even, in a long season. Now, yes, the Lower Decks are like half, they're animated length, they're half hours, but still, there'll be something new and fresh every week. And like Ollie said, we know, to their chagrin, everybody outside the U.S. and Canada can't legally see Lower Decks, and a lot of folks are still discouraged that it's on CBS All Access, and they're not subscribing even if they had access to it. So we know that, but there are a lot of you that will be watching it, and some of you will be watching it by hook or by crook. And we will try to. We felt like doing something. There's new Trek and reacting to it, but we don't know what it is. We've seen the opening scene. We know there's mayhem. We know there's Romulan stuff. We're out of here.
We will see you then.
Yes.